Today's book review is A Mother's Remorse, Living in the Aftermath of Tragedy. This is the memoir of Susan Klebold. Her son Dylan walked into Columbine High School on April the 20th, 1999 with his friend Eric Harris. The two of them had collected a stockpile of bombs and weapons, and when they went into the school, they had the intention of killing hundreds of their classmates. Before killing themselves, they killed 12 students, a teacher, and wounded more than 30 other students. Columbine has probably moved into some sort of cultural significance. It just goes by the name Columbine. We don't talk about, Columbine High School or shooting or the shooters at Columbine. It's just Columbine, and everybody seems to know what we're talking about. The event itself fundamentally changed the way that schools work, the way they take threats much differently now, more seriously. They've changed the way they protect students. There's so many things now that you see in schools that are direct relation to Columbine. The size of lockers or the regulations against students carrying backpacks and bags into classes. The fact that every door is identified with a number, a letter, or some sort of moniker. So, it really fundamentally, like I said, changed the way schools operate. In a larger context, it really changed the way that police responded to these kinds of mass shooting events. Previous to Columbine, the idea was that responding officers would surround the scene, make contact with the perpetrator, and then try to negotiate a peaceful settlement. We found out that Eric and Dylan had been dead for hours before any law enforcement made entry into Columbine High School. Now, because of the lessons learned there, the standard procedure is for police and law enforcement to make a very aggressive, forceful entry into the building or scene, rapidly identify the threat, and neutralize it, minimizing damage and casualties. So it really had a major impact on a lot of different areas of our lives. I don't know if a memoir by a mother talking about the loss of her son, and that's what this really is. This was her talking about the loss of her son. I don't know if a memoir like that would have really interested me at all. I would never have picked up anything like that. But this book, for obvious reasons, kind of connected with me a little bit differently. Like I said, as an educator, I live this life, right? And there's so many things, that I see on a day-to-day basis that came out of that day. And so, here's a book about that, and because it's something of interest to me and it's something I understand, it kind of led me to read it. And, a few years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago now, I read Dave Cullen's book, Columbine. This was a in-depth journalistic account of that day. In many circles, it is probably the gold standard or probably the best retelling of that day. Dave Cullen really takes a lot of pains to do it right, interviewing people on the scene, first-hand witness accounts, experts, people directly related to the case. It is very well researched, very well presented, and in many circles, like I said, it's the gold standard, or it's kind of the seminal work on the day. But also, I think it went to really dispelling some of the myths of the day. The ideas that were swirling around the event, which, by the way, there's some things that we still don't know. Years later, we still don't know everything about the event, and we probably never will. But he went to great pains to kind of identify some of those myths that were surrounding the day, identifying them, and then really dispelling some of them, going through and showing what was and wasn't true. It was a great work. And, I've read some other things along the way about Columbine. So, this was just another piece that gave me another perspective. And, I remember when this book came out, Susan had done some interviews. She had for years, until last year, when the book came out, she had, adamantly avoided the press and the media for obvious reasons. But she really avoided, talking about herself and her son and what had happened. And so when this book came out, it was kind of like, it was another way to look at it. And so, I was kind of familiar with it, and I knew it was out there. I kind of, for whatever reason, hadn't picked it up yet. And then about a week and a half ago, one of my students was talking about reading it. And we talked about the event, and we talked about the book, and so okay, so I was at the library and had the chance to pick it up. I think in the end, I'm a little conflicted about the book. She says that the reason she wrote it was twofold. One, she wanted to tell her side of the story, the side that she had never been able to tell, for many reasons. She had not been able to tell her story. Lawsuits, the public reaction, and a lot of guilt on her own part. She just never really talked about it. And she also wanted to bring up awareness of brain health, which is kind of the new name for mental health. This recognizes that often there is a physical component to mental health issues, and it hopes to kind of take away some of the stigma, and so that people will be more willing and able to seek out professional help when they need it. As those two things, I think she did really well. It was really good to read. There was a lot of historical pieces in it, so we kind of got some historical background. We got some context, especially the post-shooting. We get to see a lot of behind the scenes kinds of things that were going on. Who some of the players were and what some of the timelines were. That was kind of neat, and it was, like I said, it was just really good to see her point of view, because in a way, I think you have to call her a victim too. She obviously wasn't there, physically hurt, but this has been a very emotional time for her. She did lose her son, and what her son did has directly impacted and changed the trajectory of her life. So I think those pieces were really good. The parts about the mental health, I think, were eye-opening. It was interesting to hear some of the things that she talked about. As an educator, as a person who spends my life in front of students, she brought up some things like, I never thought of that, or that's an interesting or unique way of looking at things, or maybe I need to be looking more for this side to identify those students in trouble. So that was really good. But then I started having some issues. And first off, with that mental health component, she was well researched. She referred to many, physicians and reports and studies. She does refer to that, and she does seem to have done her research, and she talked to many people, she said. But in the end, it would be like me writing a book about suicide prevention. I could do a lot of research and talk to a lot of people, but in the end, I'm just repeating what someone else says. So that for me, there's that first layer that, she's not an expert. She's just a person repeating something else that she's heard, which kind of leads me then to, how did she decide to believe this particular information versus something else? She is a grieving mother, and she definitely has a particular viewpoint on this. So was she kind of cherry-picking the information that she had? I don't know if she was or not. I can't say that for sure. But in the end, it was something in the back of my mind that I was like, how do I know this information is true? How can I trust her? That was one of the first pieces. I think another piece that kind of bothered me was that it felt like she was trying very hard to absolve, to kind of absolve some of her responsibility. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, repeatedly people said, how could you have missed? These were bad parents. These were parents that allowed this to happen. They must have had guns in the house. It must have made it too easy for them to have guns, or they taught them to hate. Or they were just bad parents, detached because they couldn't recognize that their son was capable of doing this and preparing to do it. Susan does address that. She, several times in the book, she talks about, that was what people said, and it really hurt her, she said. And and there is a lot of the research, including Dave Cullen, who says, Eric and Dylan were very good at hiding their tracks and really covering up what they were doing. But there were several places, repeatedly throughout the book, in which Susan seems to go to great pains to say, I didn't see this. There was no way for me to see this. There was nothing to see. The things that she does say that were signs were things that were easily confused with other issues, just being a teenager or overworking or things like that. But it seems forced. It seems like she goes way out of her way to make sure that you know that she could not have known what was going on. Again, I think that there is, some reasoning, and it seems a little bit rational that she wouldn't have known exactly what was going on. But the way she tells it, she just goes way out of her way. And it feels forced and it feels contrived a little bit. Along that same lines, there were some things that she did post-shooting that people questioned. For instance, the day after the shooting, she went and got her hair done. And she tells that story in the book, and she goes into great detail to explain why she did it. And again, it was a piece of the story. It was a piece of the timeline. But again, it just felt forced. It felt like she was trying so hard to validate what she did, to prove what she did wasn't what it looked like. She passed some things off onto the lawyers. The lawyer said this, and this is how I reacted, and I talked to these people, and they told me to do this, and that's how I reacted. And I don't know. I can't really, say definitively that, she did these things on purpose, or these are proof that she was a detached person or a bad person. I wouldn't say that. But the way she tells her story, it almost feels like part of her believes it, and she's trying really hard to dispel that. In a way, too, I should have expected this. I did expect this. That, in a way, it almost sounded like she was asking for forgiveness from people. And, again, it is a memoir, and it is her telling her side of the story and her relating her personal experience. So I get that. That part, that's just not me. I'm not looking to, go out there and say, yeah, you're okay, it's all right, it's fine, pat on the back or whatever. So that part, and I knew that was probably going to be going into the book. I knew that was probably part of it. That part wasn't very exciting to me. And then the other part that really conflicted me was that, should I be questioning these things? Understanding it's a memoir, understanding it's an autobiographical account of this person's experiences, told from their perspective. It's not somebody from the outside giving an objective opinionless account. I know that there's biases. I know there's subjectivity. I know there's some perception issues there. But part of me is like, when these issues came up, I kept asking myself, should I be questioning this? Am I hating on her? Am I not liking her? Am I not believing her? Am I one of those people that was blaming her? And I don't blame her for this. But, when I question some of these things, I almost kind of thought maybe somewhere along the line I was questioning her, or I wasn't believing what she said. And that was a little tough for me. That made it kind of conflicting for me. In the end, I had to put this on the third bookshelf, maybe even 3.5. It was well written. It was, for the most part, it was well written. It was an interesting story, and I really appreciated the unique perspective that it offered. I also did appreciate some of the the pieces that were brought up about brain health, because I think those were valuable pieces, and have kind of made me want to start looking for some of those things. But the detractors were too great for me. Some of the rationale, why did you write this? Why did you write this? What are you looking for with that part of the storyline? I think those intentions, right, wrong, or otherwise, whether they were real or not, that kind of took away some things from me. So I enjoyed the perspective. I thought that was nice. I enjoyed some of the information she provided about the timeline, some of the background about Dylan, and the brain health stuff was good. But in the end, I just have to leave it on the third or third and a half bookshelf, just because I couldn't wrap myself around the intentions.